What's going on, everybody? So today what we're going to be showing is in Airtable how to create repeatable task systems. This is going to be an advanced task feature using Airtable's project management template, which you can get started with pretty fast. If you haven't met me before, my name is Ben Green. I'm the owner of Optimize IS, and we help tons of different businesses of all sizes, all shapes, all departments, all use cases. We help you use Airtable to the best of its possibilities. So without further ado, we're going to jump in. But if you do need help, go check out the link in the description and we'll see if we can help you out. I'm going to jump into this Airtable here. And this is the standard Airtable project management template. You can get this from Airtable's templates. They have 3 different interfaces to get started. They have getting started, work, and management. We're specifically going to jump into the task detail page. And we're going to be building this all from the interface and from the automations panel. So when I come over here and I look at this task detail page, what I want to add is probably some advanced settings down at the bottom to be able to make one of these tasks recurring. This one may not be a great example. Maybe it's this one that I want to have. So not all tasks are going to be repeatable, but some are. And some I want to do once per week, twice per week, once per month, every other week, that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to jump into. I'm going to click up here in the top left and click edit. And that's going to take me to the editor view of this detail page right here, because I'm already clicked into the detail page. I also want this to be a very clean interface. I only want all of this extra stuff that I'm about to add if this is in fact an advanced task. So the first thing I'm going to do, just thinking through the user experience, is I want this to be conditionally visible. And you can make fields conditionally visible only in these detail pages. You can not do that in something like a list view or a detail view. It's only when you expand that task. So I'm going to create a new field and call it advanced. I'm going to make this editable. And we're going to have field show on the top. So I kind of like it better with a question mark. So advanced question mark. And now I have to change this. Okay, so if advanced is checked, then I want to have this group of advanced settings. And within advanced settings, I think it'd probably be beneficial that we just use the description field to highlight some of the specifications of the advanced settings. So what I want in a repeatable task is I want to have 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 is a repeatable task where it's just the same task. Just all I need to do is mark it as completed. There's nothing that I need to no back and forth really. It's just more of like a reminder on your phone. And then the second one is when I want to document. It's not so much a reminder. It's something where it does need to be done every single week, but there needs to be notes added to check for comprehension or check for completion. Notes. Some other things is I want to be able to do it weekly, daily even, quarterly, yearly, monthly. And I want to be able to define how many, a quantity. So I want to say, I want to do it every 2 weeks or every 3 days or every 2 quarters or every 1 quarter or every year, and default to 1 if not defined. So if I think this through, I want to say this task is done, add the next one, and I think that'll be a good start. So for these first 2 requirements, I'm going to show 2 different ways to do this. For this requirement, this is all going to be done in fields and formulas. So in order to do this, there's going to be 3 fields needed, I think. 3 fields needed. One is going to define whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly. And the other is going to define the quantity. And then the other is going to be a formula to calculate what was the last time this was due versus what's the next time this is due. So the first one in here is quantity. And that will be a number field where I'm not going to allow decimal places. And I'm going to make that editable. I have a preference to field labels on the top, so we're going to make it look like that. Then we're going to have a field, we could call this time unit. This is going to be a single select where we're going to have days. Okay. Hitting enter there, save that field. So I want to click on that field, make it editable, and I want to put these side by side. So when I go back into this editor mode, I want days, weeks, months, quarters, years. Okay. So I want days, weeks, months, quarters, years. And hopefully we don't have to change that language, but that's how it's going to start off. And then the next thing we want is a formula to calculate next due date. This formula is going to be one of my favorite formulas, which is a date add formula. Date add requires a date time. So we're going to reference the deadline. Then it needs a count field, which is typically a numeric field, which we have the quantity field. And then it needs a unit field, which is our time unit field. And that reminds me, I want to make this not plural. So in order for this to work, if I have the deadline, use the deadline to calculate the next one. But if I don't, then I want to, like if I didn't specify a deadline, but I did specify that a task should be done weekly, then I want to use the date that I last modified the status of the task. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this deadline field to an if statement. So if deadline, use the deadline, but otherwise use last modified time as a formula. And fun fact with the last modified time formula is you can reference a field inside of it. So I specifically want to say, when was the last time the status was modified? And so this is what that whole line to reference the date time looks like now. Is if deadline, use the deadline. If you don't have a deadline, then use the last modified of the status field. And this is probably going to return some errors, but I'm okay with that. On different records than this one, it might return errors. And just for how it looks, I don't want to include a time. So on this one, the deadline was January 1st. I'm going to make it today, August 19th. And if I say it's going to be time unit months, let's go in here and edit these and make these not plural. I don't know if that has anything to do with why that date didn't change. It probably has to do something with the quantity. That's correct. So I want to come in here and edit this. What I mentioned earlier was default to 1 if not defined. So if I come in here quantity and I say if quantity, comma 1. So if quantity, then use quantity, otherwise use 1. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. What if I put quantity 0 here? And to that, I would respond, if you're using quantity 0, that is going to return false in my if statement. But I don't think in your right mind, you would want to have it repeat on like the same day. Okay. So this whole advanced settings panel, this is really important. I only want this to show if I've clicked advanced is checked. So when I'm in this editor mode, I can click on this whole group, which highlights the entire group. I can click on visibility and I can say advanced is checked. So only if advanced is checked will that show up now. So now I think I've taken care of these requirements. Now I need to create 2 versions of this. So You have to set up these fields before we build the automation. Otherwise, this is simply not going to work. So I'm going to publish this now. So I'm going to say this task is advanced. It's going to happen every 1 quarter. And so now it's going to say, okay, if the deadline was 8/19, add 3 to 8, and you get 11. So 11/19 is our new deadline. Or that's going to be our next task deadline because this is an advanced task. And we should specifically mention these are advanced settings for recurring tasks. So now let's build the first one, which is arguably easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and command click view data. We're going to open up this new tab and go to automations. And we're going to add a new automation. So this is what I would call option 1, iPhone reminders. And if I come back in here, I'm actually okay with even adding this as an option in here. It's going to be a new field, and we can call it recurring task type. So one is going to be iPhone, and the other is going to be it's kind of like an audit log. It's because I want to track each individual task and see the notes for that task that day. We'll just call it audit log for now. And the default I want to have is the iPhone task. iPhone task, in my opinion, if you're curious, if I go on reminders on my iPhone, I can just set it to be recurring. And then to me, it seems like it's the same task that keeps showing up. It just keeps advancing the due date, which is kind of what I'm looking for on some tasks. That's my personal preference. So let's see. The other thing that we could add is a lead time. So how far in the future do I want this next task to show? Could be something we add in here. So if we want something to be a lead time in terms of a number of days. Okay, so I want to say lead time days, and then I don't want any decimals. So in this case, what I would say is I want this task to show up 1 month before the next due date. And so we would want a lead time date if applicable. So we can say if lead time days, then use lead time days. Otherwise, I'm going to say always generate this task 14 days into the future. We're going to say date add next due date count. I'm going to say -1 times that thing that I just added because I want to subtract that many days for lead time. And then here I'm only giving the option for days. So just to organize things correctly, here again, just personal preference, I don't want the time on this field. And actually the argument I think I would have against that is maybe I only want the lead time date to calculate like that if maybe I want it to automatically create the next one unless I specify the lead time days. I think that's probably the way to go. So how we'll do that is we'll change the formula to be like this. And by the way, I'll give a link to this base if you want it in the description. We'll say if lead time days is filled in, then do it that way. Okay. So now if we go back for iPhone reminders, and actually we can say lead time date. If we don't have it, then use today's date. That way we only have to build one automation trigger for this, and we don't have to use an Airtable view for the trigger. Okay. So iPhone reminders is I want to watch the tasks table where the lead time date is today. And what else do I want? Because I don't particularly want to create an infinite loop where this is just going to create this recurring task into the future. So I could say where the next task due date. Well, let's see. If it's daily, I don't necessarily want it to be every day. Well, the other thing we can say is in order for this system to be operating, advanced has to be checked. And then how do I prevent this from recurring into the future? I don't want it to just keep on creating tasks and have my automations run out overnight. Well, actually, lead time date is only applicable for the recurring task type for audit log. So I'm actually going to postpone deciding on how that will work till we get to the iPhone or past the iPhone one. For the iPhone one, it would just be status is done. So let's see if any of those are that. This one is not yet. I want to update this status to be done. So now I can test that. And then what I want to do for the iPhone one is to just update that task. So I'm going to say update the record. It's going to be on the task table. For the record ID, I'm going to pull in the record ID from the previous step. So if I click the blue plus, Airtable record ID, and all I want to do is update the status now to be back to do. And I want to set the deadline to be the next deadline. Okay, so that's iPhone reminders, and let's see how this works. And just for fun, let's set it to be back in January 15th. So how I would expect this to work is I completed this task that was due in January, but then I actually want it to, there was another task that should have been done April 15th, which is 3 months later. And then the next one should be done so July. So let's mark this as done. And then the automation should come in here and update this. Maybe. Yep. And then now if I mark this one as done, it's going to update it back to do. Sweet. And actually, if we didn't care to include this concept of a lead time, we could just keep going with this and actually just make this a conditional automation. But in order to make it work for the lead time, I'm afraid we need a separate automation, or that's probably going to be the best way because it changes how it's triggered is the real big issue. Okay, so for the next one, the way we're going to do it is we're going to call this one option 2. And to make things simple, we're going to make this work for up to 6 months into the future. So if I go back to the Airtable base, I'm just going to make a note. This is going to be tasks for 6 months. And this one, I may or may not, if I used an example of a task that needs to be done, let's say quarterly. I think if I used my home as an example of that task, we have a air filter that needs to be replaced quarterly. If I want to make sure I have enough in stock for the air filter, maybe I'm adding tasks on that for every quarter for a certain amount of time. Or maybe let's say I'm extreme and I replace it every month. Then I want to have notes on each task for each month, but maybe a few months going into the future. So I know like I need to order this one and add notes on multiple tasks going into the future. So the way that I'm going to do this one is we're going to say option 2, and what we're going to call this is with notes for up to 6 months. Okay. And ideally I would have just duplicated this one. So how do I know the difference between these is I should be able to click this. So it should default to iPhone. And then if it's audit log, it's going to be slightly different. So I need to update this one to be the type is iPhone. And this one, I want to add a condition where record matches conditions on the tasks table where the condition is the task type is audit log. So if it's one of these audit logs, and I'm going to call this audit log just to make things proper. Then what I want to do is I want to choose that date field that we added. So I'm going to say that date is today. And the next due date is on or before number of days from now. I want to make this work really instead of 6 months, it's 180 days into the future. So if I choose that, let's readjust this one. So if I use this one as an example, deadline was 7/15. If I switch this from a recurring to an audit log task type, now I have this one here as an option. And what I want it to do is go create a new task. So the key difference in these is on this audit log one, I want to keep track of notes on each task. So I'm going to create new records. On this one, it's more of just a reminder, and I'm checking to see, is this done? Is this done? Is this done? And I'm just updating the task. So this is an update record. This one is a create record. That's the key difference here. On this one, I'm going to go create a record in the tasks table. I'm going to say using specific fields. And I'm going to start copying pretty much every single field other than a few date fields. This is one product request I have for Airtable is like, could we just have a button where I add all fields? That would be pretty sweet. So really I'm adding every editable field. Now most of these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make things dynamic. So if I switch this little gear over here, I can switch things to dynamic. Static is like every time I want this to default to week. Well, that may not be true because I may want on that record, I may have chose months. So I want to use this little blue plus and search for the time unit field. Here I want to make this dynamic. I would add a condition up here and say that this needs to be advanced. That's one of my requirements. And so I know if I'm going to duplicate this task, it's also going to be advanced. The status, this one can stay static. So this one is going to default the new task to be to do. The duration is going to be dynamic. Deadline is going to be dynamic. Start, I'm actually just going to ignore start. So this is basically the task name. So I want to map the task name in here. It's going to be mapped to the same assignee. Daily time required. Deadline, this is where I want to pull that next due date field. Project, duration. I don't think this is going to use predecessors perfectly, but we're going to leave that in here. Description. Quantity. Okay. So now it's pretty much going to copy over every single editable field other than the few that I mentioned are going to be statics, like to do advanced, everything else is dynamic, pulling from the task that came before it. So if I turn that one on, I think that one will work pretty well, maybe other than one small detail, in that I think it's going to trigger too quickly. And so what I mean by that is, let's see. So if I publish this and let's see. So there's 70 that are in to do. If I come in here and I say, I'm going to change this deadline to be today, I'm going to make this advanced. Let's see. Quantity, I'm going to say every 5 days. We'll make it days. I want to know, let's say, well, if we leave it, it should be creating these that far into the future. Yeah, let's leave that and make an audit log task. That went and created another one. So now you see I have 71 there. That one I think should go create another one. Yep, so now that's 72. And I think that will keep on going until that gets to be 180 days into the future, like the latest start date. So you'll see it's down here. It just keeps adding 5 days to the due date and creating a new task. Now it's kind of hard to stop this once it gets going. And this is why you want to make sure you have the 180 days or some equivalent of that in place, because it'll just keep going. You'll see in here, this is creating a automation run that is then triggering the next run, if you notice. So to stop this, if you do happen to find yourself in this recurring loop, you can come in here and turn this off. So I'm going to turn this off because I don't want it to just keep on running. And I'm going to come down here to this last one. So this last one is advanced, and that's also a little bit of what I meant by it may get started too soon. So how do we make it only start once I have all the settings perfect, basically? Because after I clicked audit log, then it started. And I maybe didn't get a chance to set the lead time days. So what I could do is come in here and say, see what changes if I say 5 days. If I change the deadline to be like 5 days from today, and then this lead time says 5 days. Sorry, this is a lot of mental gymnastics. Let's say 10 days here. This guy gets 5 days into the future. So that's the next due date, which is 5 days from this deadline. Let's try and see what happens then. Because if I come in here and say, I want to add another field down here. So this is basically like start audit log task. So I want to make a new field and basically make that a checkbox. Can change this to be editable. This is getting a little bit in the weeds. I would usually like a more simpler user interface, but I made some pretty specific requirements here. Maybe not in the best interest of time for this video. But I only want to show this field if it's an audit log task. I don't care to show if it's an iPhone recurring task. And now I can use this and my trigger for my automation. So only start it if that is also checked. So now to know this is going to be like the new version of my automation, this should be creating new ones. So now what this allows you to do is you can click advanced, you can start inputting all your settings, and now I want to say start audit log task. And that now creates, does that create this new one? Yeah, I think it created the new one. And so now this one is going to trigger 5 days from now. Although I forgot to add this to my automation. So that's how to create a repeatable task system. This is a more advanced feature, I would say. It's a more advanced setup than I would normally recommend because there's probably an easier way to have some sort of an in between these two where maybe it's only once you click done that it creates the next one. Maybe you don't need those tasks to be built out into the future. So I think you could take some in between of these two systems and have this work. But technically, this does work now. I think I prefer some in between of this, and maybe I'll make another video on that. But throw a comment down in the comments section if you use repeatable tasks in Airtable and whether you use the iPhone system, the audit log system, or some in between of both. Maybe once you click done, then it generates the next task, but as a separate record. Would love to know. This is just one way to do advanced tasks in Airtable. And also go down in the description of this video if you want a link to this base with these automations built into it and with these fields and the formulas built into it. Just go down into the description. You can get it. Just put in your email and it's going to email you a link to the base. But hope this was valuable, and I'll see you in the next one. Go click that link to get a copy of the base.